Welcome back to the 2 Months Podcast presented by BioStill and powered by Go Goat Sports. I'm your host, Joshua Marshall. And early this morning here, we have a very special guest. This is the first time with us. This is a guy that I've listened to a lot in the Edmonton radio stations here, where he's done some hits with a good friend of ours, Bob Stauffer and Jason Greger. But our guest today is from Boston. He is the most legendary columnist and reporter in Boston, according to Milan Lucic and Johnny Boychuk. So we have Joe Haggerty, Hacks with Haggs. How's it going?
Good. What's up, buddy? That's a great introduction. That sounds like a Stauffer-esque introduction right there. I love that.
I've learned from Bob, right? So he's actually my mentor in all of this. So he's the reason I got this going about 5 years ago. I've known him for probably about maybe 20 years, going on 20 years now. So he's definitely a guy that I looked up to and a dear friend. And I know you speak highly of him too, but how cool is it when you get a chance to do radio hits out here in Edmonton?
I love it. I've been doing them with I did them with Greger for a long time. I've done them with Bob Stauffer whenever he calls or emails. Some of the other radio hosts I've done things out there with as well. Like everybody in Edmonton, when they contact me, I'll jump on and talk, and I love it. I mean, I do most of the Canadian markets, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver. There's people I do hits with, Montreal for sure, Toronto. Like I love going on any sports radio format or podcast in Canada and talking hockey. Like I love doing it in the States too, but there's so much more interest and there's so much more NHL discussion on the airwaves in Canada, and like in-depth, nuanced discussion. Like, everybody knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas, in Boston, it's pretty good, but some of the other markets, when you go on, it's like they kind of dip their toes in and don't get too deep into the hockey waters. And when I go on with somebody in Edmonton, I know I'm going to have a real hockey conversation, whether it's Greger, whether it's Stauffer. I'm sure it's going to be the same with you.
Yeah.
And I always look forward to it.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Those guys are great. And there is a lot of,
I gotta say, I also love the hate from the people from Edmonton too. Sometimes, when they all assumed that I had stiffed McDavid for the Hart Trophy vote, and we're coming at me on Twitter, and we're trying to do a torch and pitchfork hunt for the Boston writer that didn't vote for McDavid, and cost him the the perfect Hart Trophy win. I thought that was awesome too.
Yeah, that's probably where I'm gonna go right now because full disclosure. So I live in Edmonton, but I'm not an Oilers fan. So I'm a Leaf fan. So this interview might end quick because you're Boston, I'm Toronto. But no, I grew up as a Leaf fan, and obviously big news yesterday that the Leafs, signing Austin Matthews for the extension, and they get him out for 4 more years, a part of that deal, but obviously 5 more years. But it's funny because I had Craig Button on, maybe I think it was last week, and we kind of had this discussion because there's a big hockey head Twitter account. He posts some great stats and stuff like that. So he posted a nice stat about Alex Ovechkin and Austin Matthews. And the stat was, Joe, is that at age 25, 328 days into their NHL careers, Ovechkin had 301 for NHL goals, and Austin Matthews has 299. So that obviously sparks up a conversation. Is he in the conversation? Is he one of the best goal scorers and all that? But you obviously have a great one in David Pastrnak that you get to watch on an every night basis. So my question to you is, where do you rank Pastrnak, Matthews, Ovechkin? Like, what is your top 5? Is Draisaitl, McDavid in there? Like, where's your top 5 for top 5 goal scorers?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I mean, I feel like McDavid is got to be at the top because when he decides he just wants to score goals and be the best goal scorer, he can do it. Like when he saw the fanfare that Austin Matthews got for, hitting a big number goal scoring wise, and all the adulation awards and everything else that he got, he's like, you know what? I'm going to go out and torch the league and score goals this year. Yeah. If that's what you need to do to get the Hart Trophy and to get all the attention. And then he goes out and does it this year. He's one of those guys, but I think when he just decides to turn it on and go to a different level, like nobody can touch him and nobody can go near him.
Yeah.
And like Austin Matthews, I've seen enough times where he can be stopped. He can be, roughed up. He can be, contained a little bit more. And it's hard to do, obviously, because he continues to score and he's an elite goal scorer. But like, I've never seen anybody like consistently contain McDavid. And he started to figure out the playoffs too, which is a whole different level. So I mean, I got to have McDavid at the top. I would certainly have Austin Matthews and Pasternak. I'd kind of put on even footing. Maybe it's because I watch Pasternak all the time, and I do see him get contained, and definitely the book on him is to get really physical with him. And if you do that and push him away from the net and really rough him up, you can slow him down offensively, and it works sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's an approach, and that was really the approach to the perfection line when they were together in general. Bergeron, Marchand, and Pasternak, because none of them are the biggest guys in the world, and a big defenseman core could really push them out away from the net and keep them out. And you saw that happen in the playoffs, whether it was like Tampa or other teams that had big D cores that could do it. So, I would definitely put Pasta, Austin Matthews, Connor McDavid, Draisaitl. I suppose he should be in there. I kind of view him as just an all-around excellent player, a guy that makes plays and scores goals. Like I don't know. It's hard for me to say. Like I'll tell you, my Hart Trophy votes this year were McDavid, Pasternak, and Matthew Tkachuk.
Yeah.
I nailed the finalists on that one. I was proud of myself.
Yeah, you didn't get chewed apart online or anything like that. Yeah.
No. But I have more appreciation for a guy like Matthew Tkachuk than like a pure goal scorer, because like he's just always a factor. Like the players like that, I think, are the best to watch, the best in the NHL, the biggest impact players. Like they impact everything, and they score goals and have skill too.
Yeah.
That's really something that I think is underappreciated. And like there's not that many of those players around. Like Milan Lucic is coming back to Boston, and everybody's excited, media included. Because they have not had a play. They did not adequately ever replace him. And I know he's not the same player he was when he was here before, but like still the elements that he's going to bring to the table are things that the Bruins just did not replace when he was gone. The toughness, the intimidation, like just the fear factor he puts in other teams, that automatically comes back when he comes back. And it's going to be fun to watch. Those are the players that I really enjoy watching play.
Yeah. See, I'm the same way. Like obviously, and it was interesting that when, the situation happened with Dubas leaving and Tree Living coming in. And obviously with that happening, Tree Living is going to bring a truculence that,
truculence. Yes,
exactly.
I hope Brian Burke gives you some money every time you use that.
Exactly. Right. So, but it's just like, that's the type of plays I like. As a Leaf fan, I just, I grew up loving the team because the Tuckers and the even Ty Domi and Doug Gilmour just being a killer, and his nickname, and just Gary Roberts, like some of those guys. That was how I grew up. And then I was obviously a transition period when Dubas took over. And I'm not saying he doesn't know what he's doing, but it was tough to see that you went to the well so many times with the same kind of team that now you bring in the Bertuzzi, you bring Domi, you got Ryan Reeves. That's going to kind of be a bit of a different change up. We'll see what their back end does and see if the goaltending can hold, because those are the big question marks for that situation there. But I have a huge appreciation for it. Like, and it was a privilege to see Milan here in Alberta for the last 7 years. And it never felt right though, in a way, because, like he just looks so much better, and the home is Boston. So I just talk about that there, the importance of bringing him back. Obviously, he's been on our podcast a few times, and you've got to deal with him on a personal level and business level and all that too. Where does he rank in the Boston aura of just the legends? And obviously he feels like he's probably one of the kids in that city, but from Boston's point of view, how much does he mean to that city?
Well, there's certain players that I call, and I might be the only one that does this, but when I write about them, talk about them, I call them true Bruins. There are some players that played for the team, that embodied the culture, that were tone setters to some degree, but they're the kind of players that when you think of a franchise, those players pop up, and they're the ones that embody everything that franchise stands for. And, Milan Lucic is a true Bruin player. It always felt weird when he played somewhere else. It was always great to see him when he came to Boston, even though he's, in the Western Conference. So it didn't happen that often for the longest time.
Yeah.
And it was really weird the first time he came back as an LA King at the Garden. I remember that. But I think just the amount of excitement, adulation, like giddiness that Bruins fans have that Luch is coming back is palpable. And he, I know he's talked about like he's going to probably tear up and get a little emotional when that first game back and that first ovation he gets from the crowd. It's going to be long and it's going to be, well deserved, and it's going to be, a big warm embrace for like, we really missed you. We missed the guy that could hit somebody so hard he could put them through the glass.
Yeah.
The guy that would like beat the crap out of Mike Komisarek and then like start egging on the crowd and banging the glass when he was going to the penalty box. The guy that, frankly, and I'm sure you remember this, was just dominating every puck battle he had in that Game 7 against the Leafs when the Bruins came back and won that series in dramatic fashion. Like everybody talks about, obviously, Bergeron, scoring the game winner and everything else. But like when you watched Lucic when he was on the ice in that third period, it was like man against boys. Like he was not going to lose a puck battle. No. And he was just crushing D and just a one-man wrecking ball. And it's similar, obviously, to the shift everybody talks about, with the Vancouver Giants that he was, famous for when he got drafted. But like, that is the kind of play that Bruins fans love. And, being able to stand up for your teammates, being able to, put the fear of God in the other team, also being able to put the puck on the net and make the right pass when you have to, like the underrated skills that Lucic has always had, back when he was like a 30-goal scorer with the Bruins. All that stuff is going to be welcomed back in a big way, in whatever form or fashion it takes. And, it's going to be interesting for me to watch, I guess, because he's going to be playing a different role, I think, now than he was when he was, riding shotgun with David Krejci and playing top 6 minutes and on the power play and everything else. But am really looking forward to what like a passionate Milan Lucic coming back home to Boston is going to be able to do this year. And like, I think the other added bonus and the other added effect that I'm going to be really fascinated to watch is like guy like Trent Frederick, how much of an influence Milan Lucic is going to have on him, a guy that wants to play like Lucic, and how he can sort of show him the ropes of how to be a true power forward, how to mix being tough and fight and playing the rough end and the snarling sort of end of hockey while also being an effective forward, and doing things offensively and, walking the line discipline wise. And, when you can really unleash the fury and go after somebody and when it's time to like pull it back a little bit and sort of knowing when those moments come. I think those are all like areas that Luch could be a huge asset to Trent Frederick and really transform him into even more of the player that he could and should be. Same thing with AJ Greer to a lesser extent. AJ Greer was a pretty usable, good fourth line, serviceable guy last year. He talked about how Luch was his hero, and he grew up idolizing Lucic, and having him around for him as well, I think is going to be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Like I remember there was a game earlier this year or this past season that AJ Greer had in Toronto. Him and Wayne Simmons kind of went at it back and forth a bit there too, and just obviously showing the truculence and the skill set that he has for sure. What's your thoughts on obviously? We'll move over to stick with the Bruins. We'll move over to obviously Bergeron and Krejci, retiring. How difficult do you think that's going to be for this organization going forward, or do you think they're in a position to overcome this and see that they can still make the playoffs, and do you think like a guy like Charlie Coyle can take over a top center role?
Yeah, I think they're still a playoff team. I think they still have like the bones of a playoff roster. They still have the elite goaltending that won the Jennings Trophy last year, with Omar coming off of Vezina winning season. They still have two legit number one defensemen in Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm at the top of their defenseman core. And like, there's not a lot of other D in the league that can throw two number one guys out there like that for, basically half the game, 30 minutes a game, close to it, and play in all situations. And they still have some firepower up front. Marchand, Pasternak, Jake DeBrusk is in a contract year. I wrote about him today, actually, and how the Brandon Hagel contract extension kind of puts a lofty price tag out there for DeBrusk if he gets to free agency. Like, he's going to get paid, I think, after this year is over, whether he's extended by the Bruins or he gets out to UFA status. So they still have some really good players, but like, there's no replacing Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci. There is a huge hole down the middle now for the Boston Bruins, for a team that, basically their roster has been built on having two frontline franchise centers in their top six for the last 15 years. and they lose both of them in the same summer to retirement. I liked what I've seen out of Pavel Zacha. I think he can handle a bigger role. I think he can handle the middle as long as he gets a little better at faceoffs, which I think is something he can improve. But I saw a really good two-way play out of him last year. I think he's a good playmaker and passer. His shot is obviously very good when he gets it on net. He had a career high in goals last year. So I like his upside, and I like what I saw last year. And, Charlie Coyle is a really good two-way center. I just feel like he's better served as a third line center and kind of slotting in where he's been in the past. Like he's a good third line center on a Stanley Cup caliber team.
Yeah.
Once you start pushing him up the lineup into a top line or second line role, I think you're starting to ask him to do a little bit more than he's probably best suited for, especially offensively. Like I think there's times where he flashes and where he can like be a puck possession monster. He's carrying guys on his back and taking it hard to the net. He can show off a lot of skill when he's got a little time and space. He's definitely got a good shot, but I think he has a hard time maintaining that like night in and night out over the course of an 82 game season, especially offensively. And I think you're going to be, if you put him in that kind of a role, I think you're going to be relying on whoever wingers he's playing with to drive the line a lot offensively. And, that can be a tough ask for wingers sometimes. So like my prediction, I feel like they're going to start the year with Zacha and Coyle as their top two centers. And they've got a bunch of other guys to fill in on the other two lines, whether it's Morgan Geekie, Patrick Brown, Trent Frederick, Jesper Boquist. They've got like a bunch of guys that they're kind of throwing at that and seeing which ones stick, or even young guys like Mark McLaughlin and Johnny Beecher. But I feel like at some point this season, they're probably going to realize we need a frontline number one center. We need a guy that can come in, be an offensive driver for the line, be a guy that can play big minutes, be a guy that can take the big face off, play in all situations, be the power play bumper guy, like all of that stuff. And, there's a few names out there. Mark Scheifele's been named a lot. Elias Lindholm's a guy that I think would be a really good fit for them from Calgary, and he's been mentioned. And even Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is, I know, a guy that the name's been tossed out there as well. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. But I feel like either that or some other as yet unnamed center that we haven't heard about in the rumor mill, they're going to be chasing after at some point this season, because I'm just not sure they have enough at center right now if they want to be a legit Stanley Cup contender.
Yeah, I still think they probably win the division just because what they have in goal. And I think they, obviously Montgomery won coach of the year, and I do think he is the best coach in the NHL right now. And
wow, I like that. Bullish on Jim Montgomery. There you go, John.
Very, very yeah. Like, and Vernon Fiddler's a good friend of ours, and just it's the stuff that he kind of tells me about Jim Montgomery from his connection there to his time with Dallas. And I know he went through a tough time, and he spoke about overcoming what he had to overcome, and the fact that he got another opportunity, and the fact that the opportunity that he got to the second chance, he's done nothing but, being success with it and being a role model for people that are in that situation that need help or know that they can come out on the other side once they go get help is amazing. I'm all for stuff
100%.
Like that, and
100%.
It would be the same way. And just the fact like he just knows the game, and I think he's probably been going work like crazy here with work, just trying to figure out how this roster is going to look without those centers, and path like them moving on. But you brought up a name there, and Elias Lindholm, and we watch him here a lot here in Alberta. I just feel like that's probably the best and the most ideal fit for that organization. And Boston, and I said this to Luch the last time he was on, there's just something different about Boston. And you've seen this throughout the summer when there was the trade rumors for Torrey Krug, and the kind of pretty much the only thing that said that Torrey Krug would be entertained to going anywhere other than staying in St. Louis was going back to Boston.
His dog's name is Fenway. Come on.
There you go.
Exactly. That says it all.
Exactly. And it's just funny because him and Luch have talked about on the Spit and Chicklets podcast, like how they kicking themselves for selling the house that they had there. They both own the same house at the same, like at different times, but and Luch kind of talked about it too, the aura of Boston, the aura of the Bruins organization. But when I asked Luch that, he just said, it's the city, it's everything, it's all the franchises, it's all the other sports teams, it's the fans, it's the passionate owners, it's all that. Can you kind of open up a little bit about that and what you see from the situation you're in with that big passionate where, and the reason why I asked that is because I think when Boston's on the list for someone to go there, they're fully going to entertain it because they know what they're walking into. It's a culture thing. Cameron Hughes has been on our podcast too, and he, was up and down with the Providence Bruins in the NHL Bruins there, and he just talked about how it's a culture thing. And we talked about before we hit record with Petrovic too. And I know he never got the NHL games, but he got the preseason and the experience. And it is there just with now the NHL posted the video of Chera and Bergeron and Krejci at end of an era. I don't know if I know it might seem like that, but it just doesn't feel like that to me because it feels like Marchand's still there. There's Pasternak. There's still some great players there that are going to keep that culture going. Can you talk about what that culture is from the start of the locker room, where there's no we don't say the word rookies. We don't treat the rookies like other organizations. Right. Can you open up a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean it's funny. Like on the one hand, I'm really curious to see like if there is going to be a change at all moving forward, because I think Patrice Bergeron retiring is a huge deal and a huge part of that. And like, he's been a huge part of, along with Zdeno Chara building that, but a huge part of the culture that the Bruins have basically had for the last, couple decades, close to it, of welcoming everybody in, of caring about a guy, whether he'd played 2 games for the franchise or 200. Jamel Smith is the perfect story that I always remember, where he played 3 games for the Bruins. They picked him up off waivers from Dallas. He played a couple games and then he was, off to somewhere else. He ended up in Tampa. But he was here just for a few games, and Patrice Bergeron, just having a conversation with him, took the time to talk to him, even though, he didn't really know him that well, and kind of sensed that something wasn't right with him, or something wasn't going well with him, and kind of pushed him in the direction of talking to some medical people with the Bruins about what turned out to be, he needed some professional help, and talked to a therapist, and he was going through some issues. And like, he credited Bergeron with really helping him and getting him the help that he needed, and not being afraid to ask for help if he was going through a rough patch. And like, that is what the Bruins are all about. Like, it's like they care about everybody. And that was fostered by all of these guys: Milan Lucic, Patrice Bergeron, Torrey Krug, Zdeno Chara, David Krejci, Sean Thornton when he, won the cup with them, Andrew Ferentz going back, like Johnny Mark Recchi, Johnny Boychuk. Exactly. Like all of those guys were like that. And they built something special that's been carried on since then and all the way through, and like, it's been amazing to watch that be carried on and continue to evolve and continue to be as strong as it's ever been. And I do, to your point, believe that it is going to be carried on because Brad Marchand feels a huge responsibility to carry on Patrice Bergeron's legacy and Zdeno Chara's legacy and everything that they've built over the last 12, 13, 14 years. And same thing with Charlie McAvoy, David Pasternak, all those guys, Charlie Coyle too, like, all those guys, down to Matt Grzelcyk, Brandon Carlo, like the guys that are sort of that mid-level, veterans where they're starting to get a little older. I think all of those guys together as a group know how important the Bruins culture is, to people outside the room that want to be a part of it, to the people that are in there now, how much of that is plays into their success and how happy all those guys are to be Boston Bruins. And, that culture is a big part of it. But then there's also like the other side of it, which is, original 6 franchise, outstanding sports city. All the professional athletes are rock stars in Boston, whether they're Patriots, Celtics, Red Sox, or Bruins. And, that really came back. The Bruins were sort of out of it for a while, and that really started to come back when Luch was a rookie. And, when right in about 07, 08 is when they really when they got back into the playoffs again and played the Montreal Canadiens in the first round, had a great, like, exciting playoff series. I always remember it. Like, Marco Sturm scored a game-winning goal, and Jack Edwards was talking about the building vibrating during the NESN broadcast, and it was like insane. And there were, there was games where they would just have fight night with the Habs and all that stuff. Like, that's really what brought everybody back, and all the Bruins fans back into the fold. Certainly the sort of fair weather fans that would bounce between other sports, and really put them right back on the radar to where they've been since then, and that's going on, 17 years now. So, like that Luch and all of those guys, Johnny B, all of those guys played a huge role in that happening. and building what's there now. And I think bringing Milan Lucic back now is really important piece to bring back to carry on that culture as well, because he understands what it's all about. You know, it's now not just Brad Marchand as the only guy back that's won a cup with this team leading this group. Now Milan Lucic is back as well, who was on that team and knows what it takes to win in Boston and can speak to that with authority. And guys listen to that. The younger guys that haven't won before, that carries a lot of currency with the players in that room. So, and it's also about like setting the tone and playing the way the Bruins are expected to play. That the Bruins are expected to play physical, high effort, two-way hockey. It's extremely hard to play against, and are going to go after you and are going to make you pay. And that's always what they've been about, and taking a piece out of you. And I think as long as they play that way, Bruins fans associate with the team. They enjoy watching the team. It was funny. I always felt like there was a disconnect with the Bruins during like the Joe Thornton, Glenn Murray sort of era, because they didn't always play that way. Joe Thornton was a great player, but and Hal Gill, I remember as a defenseman, he tried to challenge Zdeno Chara to a fight when he was with the Senators, and he got the hell beaten out of him. And it was like a tough era. For the Bruins back then, where they weren't necessarily the big bad Bruins like they normally are. And I think there was a disconnect between the fans and the Bruins because maybe they didn't play the way they were expected to play. And that all came back in 07, 08 with Lucic, with Sean Thornton, with Ferentz, Johnny Boychuk, like all those guys when they came in. And since then, it's been just rolling along. And obviously, they went through a little bump for a couple of years where they didn't make the playoffs when they were transitioning. And then Claude Julien got fired like right in that era after they won. But for the most part, it's been division, Atlantic Division crowns. It's been good playoff runs. It's been really exciting, fun, entertaining regular seasons. It's been tons of awards that the players have won in greatness. And a lot of winter classics and stuff like that. There's been a lot of great stuff over the last 15 or so years. And that's a credit. They get all those things coming to them because of what they're putting out on the ice and, in the organizationally out in the city. And it's really enjoyable to watch.
It is. It's and I'm more or less trying to become more of the fan of the game. And when you get on, I don't know, like I don't know if I consider myself media, but I guess we do or whatnot. But it's hard not to you want to root for stories, so you get tied to something you hear about a player. So there's that thing that happens there, but. Just history with Boston, and there's a lot of Boston fans out here in Edmonton, and my uncle he sponsors us, and he has a concrete company, and he's the biggest Bruins fan that I kind of know, and and then there's a bunch of other guys I play like beer league with that are Bruins fans too. It has its big following, and just to see where things are at, and I didn't really like Craig Button kind of put into terms is just they've just always been a way to be very professional and run things in a great way. And I just the big question is now, and I kind of listened to Bruce Cassidy on with Cam and Strick probably about a month ago now. I don't know if you ever caught that interview, Joe, but they did ask him who he thinks the Bruins should name as their next captain, and he did say Marchand, but he kind of said maybe McAvoy. But I just kind of wonder where you're at with, will there be a captain this year? And if there is, who would you like to see, or who do you think should get it?
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's going to come down to McAvoy or Marchand. It's going to be one of those two. And, I feel like Pasternak almost gets a little shortchanged in this entire discussion because he's kind of an by the way mention when you're talking about the other two, and he deserves just as strong consideration, certainly as McAvoy does, I think, because he's got just as long a contract, making the same kind of money, is going to be here long term. So, and
he within a couple and he does the best thing at the best rate, and that's scoring goals, like the hardest
that's
thing, right? So
he does the most difficult thing to do in hockey. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be their team in a couple of years when Marchand's no longer around and he's retired, like his line mate Bergeron. But in their time will come, I think, for both of them to be the captain and to wear the C. But I think for this transition time, I think Brad Marchand is the guy that you should pick. And it really seems like it's become an argument in Boston, or a discussion anyway. Should it be McAvoy? Should it be Marchand? And there's good reasons for Charlie McAvoy to be captain.
Yep.
Having a defenseman as captain is a good thing. Certainly having a guy that's going to be on the ice a ton, and a guy that is got the long-term contract and is, going to be a long-term leader on that team. And, getting out of getting out of a recent pattern where a guy's a captain for a couple of years and then it passes on to somebody else. You could have somebody that would be captain for a long time, 5, 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
If it's McAvoy. But I just think Marchand is going to be the guy that is going to make sure that Patrice Bergeron, as I said before, his legacy lives on, what he built and what they all built together. All those guys that won the cup in 2011, what they've built is going to maintain, is going to thrive, and is going to continue. He's got the guy. He's the only guy in there aside from Luch that's won the cup in Boston. Like that is the ultimate mic drop in any conversation with any player, especially if Marchand's a guy that is good about holding players accountable, saying what needs to be said, even if it's not like flowery at the right time. And he has that cred because he's won the cup and because of the player that he is to be able to say all those things. He's got the experience to know how to approach those conversations. I think he's gotten better at it. I think earlier in his career, maybe there were times where it felt like he was harder on young players than he needed to be, or was extra hard on the younger players. And I think he's figured out the way to deliver that message to younger players where it doesn't come off a negative way, and it certainly gets received the right way. And I think that's something just with experience and, with being a leader, he's kind of figured out and gotten better at. And I think that's a huge part of being a captain too, is, you're not just reaching your peers, your veteran guys, you're reaching out to the young guys on the team, all the corners of the dressing room, you're reaching out to them and connecting with them. And I think he's gotten really good at that. And it's become a strength. And that's something you need as a captain. And look, there's always going to be people, I think, that are going to look at Brad Marchand, look at what he was 6, 7, 8 years ago and say that guy should never be a captain in the NHL. He licks guys' faces in the playoffs. He's, written over $1 million in game checks to the NHL for suspensions and fines and everything else. You can't have that guy be your captain and be the face of your franchise, but he's evolved and he's changed. He is the kind of guy you could and would have as a captain now. He's really eliminated a lot of that behavior from his game, a lot of that stuff from his game, and he's just become an all-star, high-level, award-level player, and the kind of guy that you would want leading your team and you would want setting the example for everybody else. And he also is kind of the emotional leader on that team, and he has been for a while, where he's the guy that will drag them into the fight if the team needs to be dragged into the fight. And McAvoy, to his credit, is that kind of guy too. He knows the right time to throw a big hit. He knows the right time to dial up the physicality, the emotional temperature of a game, all that stuff. If he feels like, some of his teammates are kind of passengers and aren't, fully in, he'll find a way to get those guys in by setting the example. And Marchand's the same way. And I think you do need one of those kind of guys to be the captain and be the leader on the team when they play that way and when they set that tone. So, for me, it would be Marchand for the next couple of years and then maybe McAvoy or Pasternak after that. But, it goes back and forth. I've heard a lot of people just basically say, I think it should be McAvoy, both league-wide people and Boston people that just feel like it's his time and he should be taking over. And who knows, maybe him being named captain would even bring out more from him. Maybe that responsibility and being that guy would take him even to a higher level than he's already been, where he's a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman. But for my money, just, knowing how the inner workings of that dressing room are and knowing how all those players are and where they are in their careers, I think Marchand would be the right choice, especially at a key time like this, where they're transitioning from the one of the best leaders all time in the NHL, to this new sort of new wave, new thing that they're doing, new world order for the Bruins. And I think you need somebody like that that's going to be a strong enough leader to, hold things down as you're transitioning. I think Marchand is that guy.
Yeah. It's hard to argue that, Joe. It really is. I see that, McAvoy got married over the summer, and I think that's another thing that just checks the box of a leadership thing if you wanted to go in the direction of him too. But, I do think, I think if we all sat back and looked, when Chara was going to leave, it would have been, Bergeron. And when Bergeron leaves, it would have been Marchand. And then maybe the pattern is when Marchand leaves, if he gets it, it's McAvoy. McAvoy will end up being a Bruin for life, in my opinion. And, I don't think when the guys get there, and it's nice to see local guy like Jake DeBrusk to kind of, a different voice behind the bench, kind of put him in another, great situation. And, it is what it is, what happened with him and Cassidy. But at the end of
Yep.
it, like you said, that guy's a hell of a player. And if his comparable is going to be a Brandon Hagel, then yeah, he's going to get paid. And if the cap goes up 4 or 5 million next year, and then it goes up another up to 9 million in 2 years, and that's a good thing too. They have a situation in that. We'll go to the goaltending situation, and then we'll kind of close out with a story that you may, or some thoughts on Johnny Boychuk, and then just plug where people can get your information. But your situation with the goaltender with Swayman and Allmark in there, in my opinion, again, it's obviously recency bias. History shows the two best goaltenders, the two best 1-2 punch in the NHL. That was last year. I would be surprised if it's not this year. But do you think Swayman takes more starts going into this season, or do you think it's still kind of the same the way they did it last year?
I think he may get a few more starts, and I think he should. I think you could definitely give him a little more playing time, and I think it'll depend situationally, right? It'll depend on how each of them is playing. But I think if Swayman plays well, there could come stretches where he's going to get fed games, if he's hot and if he gets on a roll. And I think it should happen. The one that I look at as interesting, and I think the one area where he should, and I don't know how they're going to play this, the Bruins, but I think he deserves to get a run in the playoffs at some point. It was tough to drop him into Game 7 of that series against Florida, and that's like the second time I think that's happened where they kind of like didn't put him in when they should have, and then they put him in a really tough spot. And you're asking him to do, for a young goaltender like that, you're asking him to do some miraculous things and putting him in a tough spot. I would like to see him start a playoff series and be able to play a game or two and see what he can do and see if he can get on a roll. I feel like at this point with Linus Ullmark, I feel like my concrete opinion is formed on him as a playoff goalie, that he can't be your goalie every single game in the playoffs. Like he's not going to be able to do it for 2 months. And he definitely needs to be a guy that gets enough rest, during the regular season, needs a tandem partner, is going to be one of those guys that's going to play like 45 to 55 games, no more than that, certainly nowhere close to 60. And that is not going to be able to night in and night out deliver in the playoffs at the same level. And I don't feel like we've seen that about Swayman. I don't feel like I can make that opinion about Swayman yet, that he's not that guy, and I'd like to see him potentially get to go on a roll like that in the playoffs to see if he could be that guy. And he could play more without his performance dropping off, without certain things creeping into his game and his positioning and everything else that I think I saw with the Ullmark, certainly in that Panthers series. And granted, he was banged up, something was going on, but I think there was more than that. I think the fatigue or the pressure of the playoffs was starting to get to him a little bit too.
Yeah.
And he was doing uncharacteristic things. But, I think I want to see more out of Swayman in those particular situations. And certainly I'd like to see more of him during the regular season. But I also think the Bruins may, and it'll be interesting if both those guys are healthy and ready to go in the playoffs, are they just going to go strict tandem like they did in the regular season to such great success? Is it going to turn into Ullmark's game 1, Swayman's game 2, Ullmark's game 3, and they're just going to go back and forth and back and forth?
Yeah.
And maybe they diverge from that if somebody really like emerges and comes out as the better performer for a little stretch. Maybe it but is it going to turn into like an Andy Moog, Reggie Lemelin sort of situation to go in the Wayback Machine with the Boston Bruins when you would really toggle back and forth between those two guys in the playoffs? That's going to be interesting to watch. I just feel like reading the tea leaves, seeing how the team is built, seeing the contract statuses for everybody, seeing where they're going to need a number one center. I feel like they're going to have to trade for somebody from the outside. I really do feel like they're going to have to trade a goalie. That's the position of depth, of surplus, of excellence that they have that they can subtract a little bit from and maybe use that as a chip to go out and get the center that they need. And I think Ullmark, coming off of Vezina Trophy season, he's more valuable now than he'll ever be, I think, in his career, especially on a contract where he's only making $5 million a year. $5 million a year for a Vezina is that's good for a salary cap team.
Correct.
So, that's the direction I think they're going to eventually go into, and that would mean a lot more playing time for Swayman, and maybe even seeing if he could potentially be a number one guy way further down the road. But to answer a long answer short, I do think I see more playing time for Swayman this year. And I hope there is, because I still think, and I think the Bruins believe that he could still be the number one guy and potentially be a guy that could maybe play 60 games a year and be a true number one.
Yeah. In a way I look at it, Joe, is we saw what happened in the playoffs, and obviously he was thrown to the wolves, and I kind of tie it back to like the situation here in Edmonton. And as a Leaf fan, like, we saw Jack Campbell a lot, and he wasn't able to get over that playoff overtime win hurdle. And I think the outcome would have been different for Edmonton if maybe Campbell got one of those starts, just like it would have been a different outcome if Swayman got a start earlier than he
Game
did.
five. Game
Yeah,
five, I think, was where he needed to go in.
yeah,
I agree with you that Jim Montgomery was a fantastic coach this past year.
Yeah.
But I remember vividly asking him before game five, like, and he thought about going with Swayman here, and he's like, "Nope." I was like, "Really?"
Yes,
that's interesting.
But I think he say after the season he kind of regretted that, like probably should have went to him earlier. Like,
yes,
I thought saw something there, and I just come to that. You hear that, and you guys ask those questions to him, and I think there's always a pride thing, because I think the same thing happened here with Jay Woodcroft. It was like, hey, Campbell went in, it didn't look pretty. The season was on the line for the Oilers. The Kings were running their show in LA, and then Campbell came in and was able to get them the overtime win, and Hyman scored, and they end up winning that series. But I just think the confidence that goes for someone, if I was to see Swayman or see Campbell, I would ask them how much that meant to them, at least going into their summers. Like, I know the situation was different for both, because Campbell didn't have the year he wanted. Swayman had a great year, but I think that's what I think just separates some of these guys, Joe, with what they want to do. Like, I'm at this Perry Pern camp here in Edmonton, and I'm talking to Mr. Jakubek. He's one of the older senior guys there that helps this camp out, and we're just looking at some of these guys, and it's not a knock to like every single guy there, because I don't know what's going on, if they got appointments to go after their skates, but you just see some of the guys put in the extra 5 minutes or extra 10 minutes in the gym or extra 5 minutes on the ice. And and I just think some of these guys separate themselves when they do that. And you talk about it earlier with Tkachuk, because I think the Tkachuk's that way. Everything I heard about Matthew Tkachuk his time in Calgary was that he's the first one at the rink, he's the last one at the rink, he's very humble, he gives back, he takes care of the trainers. I just think things like that go a far way. And I know Luch is a lot like that.
I was going to say Milan Lucic was always like that and has always been like, it's just got it.
Yeah.
Down to like giving like free gear that he got to like the younger players and the other guys, and like, giving all his Bruins gear stuff to like some of the other guys that were called up for a day or two. Like, you'd see him do stuff like that all the time. Totally got it. 100%.
Yeah. So I just think when guys separate themselves that way, success breeds great. And this kind of ties into maybe what Johnny Boychuk, you saw him there for so many years in Boston, and I went to elementary and junior high with Johnny, and
my God, that's awesome.
Yeah. So and it's amazing. Obviously, over years you lose a little touch, but we kind of got reconnected in the playoffs. The Battle of Alberta, we saw each other there real quick, and then just a few other occasions we ended up running into each other. And actually, his wife Sheena Boychuk, who you probably have met, she sponsors one of our NHL segments on our podcast here too, and she's doing real estate right now in Edmonton. But when I was talking to them, not too long ago, I commend him and her so much for what they've done. I know it was a tough road, 374 games, in the minors before he really cracked it in the NHL, where there was times where things didn't go as planned. And we all know the AHL money versus NHL money is quite different. And, I had Frankie Corrado kind of say yesterday that what you make in 2 weeks in the in the AHL, you make in 1 day on an NHL contract. And it's just like the toughness there. But how much Johnny's given back to the game, the humbleness that he has, the character he is, the laughter he brings to the party, and it's kind of cool because we talk about this success and this great history that what the Bruins organization has, Joe, but it can't help to think that's almost the same way with the Islanders. And then when Johnny went over there, I feel like he kind of brought what he learned from Boston over to the Islanders and instilled that into that organization. I know, Tavares had left, but I think like Anders Lee and Brock Nelson and all these other guys and Barzell and Noah Dobson, like all those guys soaked what Johnny learned in Boston to bring that to the Islanders, because there's a loyalty that is there in that organization too. But can you talk about Johnny Boychuk and your dealings with him? I know it's a long-winded question, but
No, Johnny is the best. I love Johnny Boychuk. Like he's my favorite Boston Bruins player that I've ever covered. Like, and like to your point where you're talking about before, rooting for like stories or rooting for certain things. Like when you do the job that I do, you don't root for teams. Like you just don't. Like obviously it's easier when the team is doing well. You like to see them have success. It's fun to cover long playoff runs. It's awesome to cover a Stanley Cup final. And I've covered 3. I've really been lucky with the Bruins. I've covered like 4 or 5 overall. But like it's the people that you root for, and it's the people that you really hope do well, and the people that you meet. And Johnny Boychuk is one of those guys that I've always rooted for, and that I've always enjoyed covering and interacting with, and now being friends with. We'll trade texts every once in a while, and he'll pop up out of nowhere to say hello or do something.
Yeah.
I think, just getting to know him over his time with the Bruins, like, yes, he learned things with the Bruins during his years there and learned things from the core group and playing with that group that he passed on to other teams. But part of that is just Johnny Boychuk too. Like he's just a special guy. He's like one of those guys in an NHL dressing room when he was a player that just made it fun for everybody, and you need some of those guys over the course of an 82 game regular season where it gets really difficult to get up for like a Wednesday night game in Arizona or something like that, but he was the kind of guy that would make that fun for everybody else and made it fun for himself too. And I just remember like how bummed everybody was, players, media, like everybody, when he got traded right before the season started. When they had all those defensemen and they had the salary cap issues, and you knew somebody was going, and it ended up being Boychuk that got traded to the Islanders. And I'll never forget this. That game he got traded was a preseason game. It was right before the season started, and I was doing TV, and after the game was over, I have to do TV like right after at this point, I was still working for NBC Sports Boston. So I had to do TV like right after the game was over. So I missed Claude Julien's press conference because I was up doing TV. And Claude goes up to the podium, notices that I'm not there, and goes, "Oh, what is Haggerty off somewhere crying because Boychuk got traded?"
Oh, no.
Just like ragging on me because he knew we were tight.
Yeah.
And, it was pretty funny. But like, that's how much people cared about him. I remember when he was with the Islanders and he came back, and I think he was injured at this point. And he wasn't playing in the game, and so was Adam McQuaid. And so he sat up with Adam McQuaid, and even though they were on different teams, they sat next to each other like while they were watching the game. And we were just laughing at stuff Boychuk was doing. And I'm like, I miss that guy. McQuaid's like, we miss him so much.
Yeah.
Now that he's gone, like we wish he was still here because he just brought a buoyancy and a joy to everything that he did. And part of that was probably because he paid his dues in the AHL, and he, he appreciated everything he had because he really had to work for it. He really had to grind to get there. And once he got there, his talent took over, and his character took over, and all that stuff took over. And you saw what an outstanding defenseman he was. Yeah. I still remember him telling me about how, like, when he was with Colorado, they tried to turn him into a forward and wanted him to fight and wanted to totally like change who he was as a player. And he was so happy to get out of there, because of that.
Yeah.
So, the Bruins did him a solid trading for him and doing the right thing and developing him the right way. And, he repaid them with awesome, seasons as a defenseman and, a key role on a Stanley Cup winning team. I'll never forget going to Europe with Boychuk and all those guys when they did the premier games in Prague. Yeah. That was hilarious. Like there was all kinds of fun stuff. I bet, and in that era, I was traveling for every single game. I covered all the games. I traveled to every single one of them with NBC Sports Boston. I did I remember doing a segment with Johnny in Europe for TV where we went to like the medieval torture museum in Prague.
Yeah.
And we just walked around this crazy museum that was all torture devices in Prague. And we had the like funniest time when we were there. So like, and he made a great segment because he was hilarious the whole time when we were walking around the place. I still have a picture of him like putting a rope around my neck like he was going to hang me. So like, people like that you meet along the way are awesome. And, whether it was him, whether it was his brothers, Sam and Dave, who I've gotten to know a little bit over the years, whether it was his dad, who I randomly met at a Bruins practice in Edmonton, I think after he was traded. He was traded after he was traded. And Johnny's dad still went to the Bruins practice to check in with the boys. And I ended up having like a 2-hour conversation with him, just hanging out at the rink. Like he was my best friend, or like he was one of my friend's dads that I hadn't seen in a while.
Yeah.
And it was Johnny's dad. So like, I feel a real affinity for Johnny Boychuk and always have, because I just think he's a good person. And sometimes you meet those people in life you connect with, and Johnny was always one of those guys for me. So I can't say enough good things about Boychuk and his entire family.
Yeah, just amazing people. From his mom Audrey and his dad John, and just like you say, David and Sam, and just amazing people from through and through, and good Northside Edmonton people here that paved the way and never forgot where they came from. That whenever they have to do to help other people out, they will do it. And I can't, like you say, you said it in great words, and we've been trying to say it for so many years here, and it's great that other people are seeing the same thing that we see with him. And and it's obviously fitting that him and Luch are like best friends and brothers. So how the connection that those two guys had, and Luch told a good funny story when he was on with us just recently too. But so very well said by you. This was a really fun interview. Where can our fans, the new people that haven't heard you before, or just where can we find all your information to subscribe, like all that stuff? Where can we get that?
Yeah, if you Google Pucks with Haggs, everything will come up. I have a Substack account, which is a newsletter membership where you sign up, and my stories, as soon as they get written, get sent to you. That's at joehaggerty.substack.com. I write a bunch of free stuff about the Bruins and the NHL, and there's also a premium subscription where you have to pay to read the whole article. So anybody that wants to sign up for that, it's greatly appreciated. I also have the Pucks with Haggs podcast. It's that CLNS network. So if you Google Pucks with Haggs podcast, it'll come up. It's on YouTube. You can certainly check that out. We do a new one every week. And once the season starts, we'll probably go to twice a week. And Joshua, I'd love to have you on sometime for sure.
Yeah. No, anytime. I would be a pleasure for sure. You are the voice of Boston here, in my opinion. And I know everyone loves Jack Edwards, the Bruin fans, but
yes, including my son. My 10-year-old hockey playing son loves Jack Edwards too.
Yeah.
I took a bunch of the kids to the Beanpot at the Garden.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, and all they wanted to know was if Jack Edwards was there and could they go say hi to him and meet him. That was like their number one thing. So that guy is another legend in Boston for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll put your subscription, all that, into our show notes here, into our podcast, and looking forward to kind of reconnecting with you here again, and building this a little bit more throughout the year. It's been an honor to interview you, because I've listened to you for so many years over the radio waves here in Edmonton. So it's nice to finally get a chance to connect with you this way. And maybe when you're here in Edmonton, maybe we can go for a bite to eat, show you some nice restaurants here when you guys are in town, if you do get out here during the year at all. Or maybe I'll just swing out to Boston and go see Luch and them, and we can go somewhere there too. So we'll figure something out for sure.
Absolutely. You know what? And when you come on my podcast, Joshua, we're going to get Johnny Boychuk on too, and the three of us can just shoot the breeze for 45 minutes.
For sure. Awesome. Sounds great. Okay. All right.
School stories. I look forward to hearing that.
Yeah, you got that right. Thanks, Joe. All the best to you and your family. We'll chat very soon.
All right. Thanks, Joshua.